Thomas, how did psychedelics influence your work as a philosopher? Why do you find them so fascinating?
Well, if you work, as I've done in philosophy of mind, it is very interesting to see what is possible and what is necessary. So, for instance, psychiatric case studies or studies after brain lesions are interesting because you want to see what can be double dissociated in the mind. For instance, most people think that it's normal that you hear what you see. But there are certain brain lesions where people have the experience that their auditory experience has nothing to do with what they see. So it's like a silent movie with a soundtrack running that has nothing to do with that. Now, psychedelics are interesting because they can give you very important theoretical intuitions. The phenomenology of psychedelics can show many things which are not necessary. For example, the most classical example, of course, is the phenomenology of ego dissolution. Conscious experience can happen without a single knowing self, right? But there are many other things, like that. To take another trivial example, color vision is not a fixed thing, that the different shades of green, for instance, can open up to a full rainbow, which you normally don't see, and so on. That for many people, synesthesia is a new experience, that they can see sounds or taste colors and things like that. So it gives you intuitions about what forms of mental content can be combined, and integrated, which are normally not integrated, and which can be double dissociated, where you always thought this is necessarily together. But there are many, many other things in the phenomenology of altered states of consciousness which are theoretically interesting. The deeper question, of course, is what is the epistemological potential of altered states? So, are there genuine forms of knowledge that are only available, say, under the influence of a certain molecule? We definitely have the phenomenology of deep insight. People have the feeling they see things, patterns in their own life, or they have therapeutic successes which they attribute to an experience of insight. But if you look at this more carefully, analytically, it's not so easy. What actually constitutes knowledge outside of true sentences? And of course, one risk from a philosopher's perspective is that many people who are not philosophically educated, who have never thought about epistemology, have deep and dramatic experiences, but interpret them in a naively realistic fashion, and then come to crazy metaphysical conclusions, worldviews, maybe draw conclusions from this. And this has many aspects. So one example is there are now interesting successes with psychedelic therapy. Why is that interesting for philosophy? Because it's a conceptual question itself. What is mental health? What is mental disease? And how can we actually frame a therapeutic process? What does it mean that a therapeutic process is successful? We cannot just go by our feelings or even, patient reports, they feel better now. There are epistemological issues in therapy as well, because every therapy somehow presupposes a model of the human mind, what a mind is. And most therapists, also non-psychedelic therapists, know very little about cognitive science, philosophy of mind, and so forth. So there are a lot of conceptual issues, and actually we would need much more philosophy of psychiatry, for instance, philosophy of psychedelic therapy, to get this beginning to professionalize it and to make it more systematic, because I'm no expert, but for me, it's entirely unclear what a successful psychedelic therapy means. It could be that you have a patient who reports, my symptoms are gone, but who now has some wild metaphysical delusions or some irrational belief system, like religious people who heal psychiatric disease with their religious belief. Would that count as successful therapy, to bring in irrationality into the patient and the symptoms go away, and so on and so forth?
In this field, we often use terms without defining them, and one of these terms is consciousness. In your book, you write that consciousness is the appearance of the world. Can you explain this?
Yeah. So there are, of course, many different concepts of consciousness. The critical one is what philosophers call phenomenal consciousness, that a world subjectively appears to you. Psychedelics, of course, to put it very mildly, teach you that the world can appear very differently to you than it has ever appeared. The question is, of course, what does it mean for any system, for some animal, for a machine perhaps, that it does not only have knowledge of the world and can act in the world, but that the world appears to it. That is, that there is a conscious model of reality in its brain where it can direct its attention, that it can manage the precision by which it experiences things, but that it can also act on things. I believe consciousness is a natural phenomenon. It's ultimately a physical process, although many people don't like it. It's a very, very rare process that only appears in the universe as we know it at very rare locations in higher nervous systems. And you see in our own case that the organism which I am is not always conscious. There is non-REM sleep, dreamless deep sleep. In dreams, conscious experience is very different. Then there's the waking state. So it's more like a virtual model of reality that the organism sometimes activates to selectively elevate some of the information in the brain to global availability, that you can think about it, you can remember it, you can form a concept about it, you can attend to it. And that gives flexibility to the organism. It also gives context sensitivity to the organism. A sleepwalker or an unconscious robot, for instance, is not so context sensitive. And there are very likely many functional advantages that come. We don't have a theory of consciousness, we don't know what it is, but we have some very good ideas. So, for instance, it makes the behavioral profile more selective of an animal. A sleepwalker is pretty robot-like and repetitive, or some coma patients, types of coma patients, can do some behaviors, also gaze following, but it is very mechanic and not specific. It doesn't adapt to the environment. So consciousness is a good thing to have. For us, it's a difficult thing to have, because you see, we have to sleep and dream, and we cannot be conscious all the time. So I think conscious information processing is a very special layer of information processing, and most of our intelligence is unconscious intelligence. And almost all of the information processing going on in the brain is unconscious information processing. But many people never get this because they are fully immersed in this virtual reality created by our nervous system. To give some simple examples. Right now you have the feeling we are in a room and there's light, it's bright. If you open the skull, there is no light in the brain, it's really dark. But your experience is of being in a lighted scene. You have the experience of colored objects. But if you ask physicists, they tell you that in front of your eyes there are only mixtures of wavelengths, and different wavelengths, mixtures can create the same color experience, and different stimuli can converge on the same subjective experience, but you can have the same physical stimulus, take a hot stove, that can create very different subjective qualities. You can feel the warmth on your skin, and you can see the red glowing on the stove, visual and haptic on your skin. It's the same physical cause, so there is no one-to-one mapping there. Our conscious experience also tells us there are objects, robust objects. Physics tells us there's no such thing as objects, individual substances. It doesn't exist. If you open the brain, you don't find objects in the brain. You find nothing that resembles colors like green or red. And the most interesting thing on which I have worked for the last 30 years is conscious experience tells you there is a self that sits in a lighted room with colored objects. But if you look into the brain, you do not find a self. It's almost trivial. There is nothing, there is no little man in the head, there's nothing there. So this is where it gets interesting, because it seems as even the subjective perspective, the knowing self, the self as Antonio Damasio would put it, in the act of knowing, in the moment of I see this apple on the table, is all part of that virtual reality. It's not only outside, but it's the process of knowing itself that is being modeled. That is something that many people don't understand. And this is where psychedelics come in again. Of course, psychedelics can tell you that light, colors, objects are absolutely not necessary in the form you experience them right now, that there are different other possibilities. But when the psychedelic experience gets deeper, you begin to realize the constructed nature of self and the constructed nature of the seeing process itself. And that's, of course, valuable, because for many people, all these things will just be, how do you say, theoretical speculations, discussions we have, books. But it is a very, very different thing to non-conceptually experience this. It's, again, I wouldn't say it's direct experience, because also this experience is constructed. But to see possibilities, which maybe, if you had a lot of imagination, were theoretical possibilities for you in real experience. And then also, one thing psychedelics have told me is also that there is an unfathomable depth of things which are absolutely inconceivable, things that you will not ever be able to describe in language to anybody else while it happens or afterwards or to yourself, but things which you cannot even conceive of or understand while they're happening. There's just this enormous, intense depth of things you can experience which are just beyond the cognitive self, to the point that sometimes you can know that you now see something and that you will never be able to remember this afterwards. Not even describe it or write it down, but you it's impossible to remember this in normal waking state. So there's this uncharted territory, and a large part of humankind are completely unaware of this ocean of possibilities that's out there. They just are fully immersed in their biological virtual reality and think this is it. I'm living my life, I'm having dreams, there are colored objects, I'm someone, I live and I die. So there is something scientists would call phenomenal state space, the space of possible conscious experiences. And most of us live our life in a large but very confined region. And I think one value of psychedelics is that they can demonstrate to you very directly how large this space is and what regions in the space are there. And that, of course, makes intelligent people think. If some regions in the state space are more interesting than others, if they, for instance, produce less suffering, or if they enable forms of knowing we haven't thought about, back to the epistemology. And all these things are, of course, interesting for philosophers, because they would change the theoretical intuitions they have when they later work again and discuss and write books. They would have ideas they would normally not have had and see possibilities they haven't thought about and understand something in a more direct way, namely that the kind of consciousness we right now have, that is the result of millions of years of biological evolution on this planet, these bodies, these genetics, this nervous system. But it's in no way necessary. It's the reality tunnel these systems have developed, and which works quite well to have children. But the question is, if there could be other reality models which we are more interested in. I'm not so sure. Maybe it's just not possible to make any of these altered states permanent states, even if you've seen something, because of our hardware restrictions. Maybe it's just not possible. But I think just knowing about this ocean of alternate possibilities that's there all the time, that gives dignity to your life also. That adds a depth dimension to your life that can be very valuable.
Who can tell what is a skillful mental state and what is not? Who should control this? Is it the government?
So my view on this is that psychedelics are a technology, and that every technology creates risks and benefits. Think of cars or knives or artificial intelligence. And in applied ethics, the goal is really to optimize the risk-benefit ratio with an perspective for the common good. So the question with cars, artificial intelligence, or knives is, how do most members of societies, also poor ones, minority, have the maximum benefit, profit from this technology, and how do we minimize the risks for everybody? A bit wider perspective is all sentient creatures, not only human beings, but animals as well. But for psychedelics, that's not so relevant. I don't think it's important that cows and pigs can take LSD or something like this. So how do you optimize the risk-benefit ratio? That's the question, and that's what every government in the free world, every democratic government is actually obliged to do. It's a duty of care for the state to maximize the risk-benefit ratio of new technologies. I mean, psilocybin is an old technology of humankind, but now we have many new molecules. So governments should, for instance, resist commodification. They should resist billionaires moving in and commercializing the field. And then in the end have a situation where people can have, say, a medical psychedelic experience, but have to pay 5,000 or 10,000 euros for it. They should resist forces that just try to rip off health insurances and private patients. So that's one problem. And as I have explained in my lecture yesterday, there is an incentive for politicians to act unethically. So strong, and this has been there for decades. So well-informed politicians know that there is a catastrophe going on, and that is for decades, because young people experiment with these substances in dangerous environments with unclear dosages, bad preparation, and unclear degrees of purity also. So they don't have good technology and a safe setting. They know this. They also know a lot of accidents happen, adverse reactions, traffic actions, psychotic reactions that never come up in any statistics, because the underground, friends and families, of course, try to disguise what has happened. Don't try not make doctors or police understand how this happened and why this happened. So we don't know how much damage there really is. And politicians are happy with it. Why are they happy with it? You cannot gain many voters by developing a rational, evidence-based policy for the use of psychedelics, for example. The risk for a single politician for their career is very high to make the first step, because opponents might easily scandalize it. If one has seen the ridiculous process in Germany, in my own country, for instance, leading to the semi-legalization of cannabis, it shows you very clearly that to achieve the same thing for a more interesting molecule like psilocybin or so would just not be possible, because the business sector has no financial incentives. It would only be a small number of people who are interested in this for curiosity or therapeutic reasons or spiritual reasons, for instance, or philosophers. You cannot make money with this. In low doses, it's taken very rarely. Politicians have a direct incentive for cynicism, as I call it, because for decades in the US, in Europe, they pay the price of all these accidents happening in the underground, and those who are informed know it. And they have this trade-off, my own career or doing something about this problem. And of course, they think about their own career. The illegal business sector, which also exists, also doesn't really have an incentive to work at a rational, evidence-based enculturation of it. There are some idealists, of course. There is a not-for-profit illegal business sector, but they cannot change politics. So in principle, if governmental sector, business sector don't work, I think a change would have to come out of civil society itself. I have formulated some of the ideas under the heading of Bewusstseinskultur, but I must also very clearly say, most people don't like this, that I'm not very optimistic about it, because of the 193 countries on the world, in most of them, even thinking about any of these things is completely impossible, out of the question. You cannot discuss these issues in Russia or Sudan or India or China. And then in the free world, say in Europe, large parts of the population have no intuition that this could be something that is good for them in their own life. They know caffeine, they know alcohol, some of them know nicotine, and this is about it. And there has this disinformation campaign by the conservative media for decades. So it's pretty unlikely, I think, that out of general civil society we get a robust initiative to change the situation. I hope I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong because there are other movements also. For instance, a large part of population are now interested in mindfulness and meditation and take up a practice there. And some of them who are more serious and see this is good will also learn, many of the people who have done a lot of this have also done a little bit of this and found it good. And that this comes together, possibly. But I'm trying to be realistic. I know everybody here wants to be super utopian and has this positive self-congratulatory attitude to it. If I try to be realistic, I think the risk-benefit ratio will deteriorate in the coming years because there are now more than 1,000 other molecules on the market produced by underground illegal activities. So there's not 12 or 15 interesting illegal molecules like 30 years ago. But now there is 1,147, the United Nations say, and this is not going away. It's just like with artificial intelligence. This becomes better, and it's an enormous risk. I think the chances of actually having a genuine Bewusstseinskultur that develops a mature way of dealing with this substance are not very good on a large scale. But on the other hand, you could also say that those very few people in the parts of the world which are still open societies and free and democratic, and who are rich enough to have scientific information and open discussions like we have, that they have an enormous responsibility for the rest of humankind, because the generation of a new cultural context has to begin in these free parts of the world somehow. And we'll see if it happens. I see a lot of problems there, but eventually it might happen that politicians understand that the risks are just too big. I mean, think of the fentanyl crisis in the US. Well, think something nobody thinks about a lot. What alcohol does in Russia, you know. And I think we are in a risky situation. There are 1,000 new molecules out there. The scientific process of developing new medications and molecules is now accelerated by artificial intelligence. This can be very fast. It is possible that some new molecules will be developed that spread like a bushfire, that everybody wants to have if they come along. And if we don't have a culture and some underground knowledge how to deal with temptations like this could be very dangerous to society. We all know the classical hallucinogens like psilocybin, LSD, mescaline, they are not toxic. They are not addictive. But there might be new classes of substances with new phenomenologies that in a certain sense are just irresistible, things we haven't thought about. And we should be ready if that happens. We need a cultural context. The situation I see is the same as you have it with the applied ethics or legal regulation for artificial intelligence. Suddenly, scientific development grows very fast. And we're just too slow. We're not prepared for this. And I think something like that could also happen in the field of psychoactive substances.
You call for more intellectual honesty in the psychedelic field. Why do you think it is missing?
This is a long story. I will answer the question of why intellectual honesty is so important by taking a look what the two most deepest emotional needs are that almost all human beings have. One deep emotional need almost all of us have is mortality denial. We are the only animals who have an explicit conscious knowledge of the fact that they will die. We try to manage this. It causes anxiety. This was not meant to happen in biological evolution. So for many centuries, there are large industries that help us with this. The Catholic Church, organized religion, who offer models of reality which say it is just not true. You have an immortal soul which can exist independently of the biological brain. There is life after death. And it's interesting to note, if you look at something like the Catholic Church as an organization, it has survived all wars, all nation states, all revolutions. And the fact that it is so robust, this delusional industry, shows you how deep the need is. One could say more technical things about it, also neurocomputationally. Into some human beings will, in principle, always like any theory or any interpretation or anything that gives them the feeling there's a little back door, death may not be the end. The second deepest emotional need human beings have is, I think it's a very bad term, is meaning making. So a really bad question is also the question for the meaning of life. Because if you think about it, you don't really know what you're asking for. Sentences have a meaning, words have a meaning. What are you asking for? So you would like to have a long-term self-model, an autobiographical self-model that extends into the future. Some soft and fuzzy philosophers call this a narrative self-model. So all of us would like to have in their mind a narrative of their own life which makes their life coherent. Gives us the feeling this is not driven by chance events, there is a robust self. I have a top goal, maybe enlightenment or insight through psychedelics or scientific knowledge. And this main theme I have, self-knowledge, discovering myself, this main theme gives coherence to the whole story. So we are all trying to find something all the time, some abstract principle that gives us an experience of deep meaning. Now here's where psychedelics come in. Psychedelics definitely can give you deep experiences of meaning. Then there's a large number of people who don't understand that there's a difference between having a deep experience of meaningfulness and life actually objectively having a meaning. There is a difference between seeing a red apple and a red apple actually existing in objective reality. Many people don't get this distinction, so they think a strong subjective experience of meaningfulness shows that this whole thing is coherent. And the same for wonderful experiences that seem to make it very obvious that consciousness, for instance, is something that pervades everything and is present in every object also as what Buddhists would call the quality a suchness, for instance, in perceptual objects. The problem we have is people who undergo psychedelic experiences, and if things go well, they actually have fantastic experiences of reality like they never had it. They have often experiences with the panpsychistic quality, that consciousness is everywhere, in everything. It's absolutely counterintuitive that something like this should result from physical processes in their biological brain. And then afterwards, the question is, how do they interpret what has happened to them? And then it is also only very natural and very human to jump to very strong metaphysical conclusions, to say consciousness doesn't appear in the world appears in consciousness because I have seen it, and so on and so forth. There are things which cannot be physical phenomena because I have seen them. So naive realism about this very impressive and beautiful phenomenology can lead to, as I would claim, irrational belief systems and very dubious metaphysical assumptions, and that in turn is a danger for democracy. Because I think many of us who have had some more intense psychedelic experiences can also confirm that in a certain sense it narrows the number of human beings you can still talk to about. Because the number of people who will even remotely understand what you're trying to talk about becomes very small. There's a small elite who just knows. But we have this everywhere. We have this with meditators, but you also have it, for instance, with soldiers that have been in combat, or with people who have done extreme sports. There's just a small number of people who actually understand what they've been going through. And this often leads to a situation where people don't communicate anymore. Why should I talk about this with people who just don't understand? But I know what real reality is. So one danger I see, if psychedelic use became more widespread, is that many people may be lost for critical political discourse. We need people in open democratic societies who actually participate in open discussions with genuine arguments, ideas of themselves. But if many people withdraw from the feeling they won't understand anyway, and I know better, these people are lost. They are lost for society, which also means the vacuum is filled by others who have nothing in their mind than careerism and having children, right? These biological imperatives rise in a dominance hierarchy and have children. So it would be important that a culture of consciousness remains rational and evidence-based and does not go down, as I perceive it to happen. I may be wrong in large parts of, for instance, the American psychedelic community, to go tribalism, romanticism, beautiful, wild, New Age or esoteric images of the world, and so on and so forth. It's beautiful. It creates a tribal identity. It makes you feel at home with other people who really know, But it separates you from all the rest of society. And I think Europe, it looks like, is something, maybe together with Australia, as the last man standing on this planet, that we have a high responsibility of developing an approach that does full justice to the depth of the beauty of it including the spiritual quality in it, but still remains rational and evidence-based. For instance, by acknowledging that this is very likely something that happens in the brain and has to do with a very small amount of molecules. And that maybe there is a neurocomputational phenomenology of psychedelic experiences we can develop, and so forth. That we bring the best things together. Like Europe has had enlightenment historically, we have democracy, we have the scientific method, we have open rational argument. To integrate this with these wonderful experiences and not just go to parallel universes and get lost there. And in my own life, I've seen this a lot. And again, it's more than understandable, and it's completely human if confronted with more than one or two of these experiences and seeing their depth and beauty, to in a certain sense withdraw or have this feeling, what do I care what some neuroscientist says about this? You know. Or, for instance, after having seen decades of failed enculturation and no proper legal framework, to just say, we don't care anymore. We have our underground culture, we have underground labs, we have underground knowledge how to handle these substances. Let mainstream society, just give them up, let them just go. It would be good if we still keep integrating, although the conditions around us, also given the planetary crisis and many other factors, are not very conducive. They are not easy conditions. But it would be historically new. You see, these substances have also been used for millennia, and mostly in a shamanistic, religious context in which there was no culture of rational argument and evidence. This would be something historically new if we manage to find a way not only for therapy, for very few people with diseases, but for everybody, to integrate this with the openness of democratic societies and not lose the depth and the beauty of it. I don't know how to do it, but I think this is what the goal should be.